Good morning. Welcome to the Point. After a very busy election cycle that culminated in November and then lame duck session, it seems like politics has been nonstop, but maybe that's the new political norm. In any event, we haven't had an opportunity to introduce you to some of your new legislators, so over the next couple of weeks we're going to do that, beginning with Representative Mark Huizenga from Kent County, from Walker and Algoma Township. He follows Representative Rob Verheulen in a similar path, at least politically, and talks about some of his focus. Representative, tell me a little bit about your background. I know the folks in Walker are very familiar with you. They've had a chance to vote for you before this past election cycle. But for those who haven't met you yet and those in our broader viewing area, tell me a little bit about your background, what you've done up to now.
Sure. Well, my background is really finance and accounting, but from an elected perspective, I was privileged to serve as the mayor for the last 5 years. I completed my term last year and had to resign once I was elected to the 74th District. As mayor, I had a lot of involvement in things like the finance committee and a lot of involvement with just operations of the city.
Which actually leads to some of what you'll be doing here. We'll talk about budgeting in a little bit. But what brought you to run for this office? Not that it is not a path that we've seen out of Walker before, sure. Because the person that you replaced also was the mayor of Walker and came into this job. But what made you decide to choose that path?
You know, I think that one of the things that really compelled me was that I felt like I made a difference in the city of Walker. I sat on the finance committee, chaired the finance committee. We made a lot of things work better. Taking that eye of fiscal accountability, responsibility to the city of Walker, knowing to make a difference for 25,000 people, it was really compelling to me. When term limits came around, Verheulen's term limited out, and Rob did a great job. Happy to follow in his footsteps, but taking that same level of fiscal responsibility to the state of Michigan was really my objective.
When you think about what it's like to perform at the city level versus the state level, how much of that is transferable? Because in many ways the processes are the same. You were saying just before we went on the air, just more zeros come after it. That's here right. At the state level. But how much of that is directly transferable?
Well, one of the things that's different in government accounting is this whole aspect of fund accounting, and understanding how fund accounting work is unique. Most people, that when you balance your budget in your household, you have the income that comes in and the expenses go out, and that's it. With government accounting, we have different funds that come in from the feds. They may have restrictions associated with them, and just understanding how that works gives me a little bit of a leg up in what I do here in Lansing.
Talk a little bit about what some of your focus will be, beginning with some of your committee assignments that reflect some of your past experience. Because when I came in, I said, refresh me on your committees, and you started this litany, and some of those are pretty big budget items too.
Sure. Well, I serve on the Appropriations Committee, and I'm the chairman of the General Government Committee. That's about a $5.2 billion budget, so big numbers there. Also privileged to serve on the Higher Education Committee, K through 12 education, as well as Health and Human Services.
When you talk about general government, people will say, what does that mean, general government? That sounds like a catch-all, but it has a very specific function for that $5 billion.
Sure. So general government does have that catch-all aspect to it, but it includes things like the Attorney General's office. It includes the local government revenue sharing. Revenue sharing is also one of these words that most of the viewers probably wouldn't understand, but if you talk to any local elected official, it's almost always the first thing they talk about. How do we improve revenue sharing? Revenue sharing is the dollars that come from the state to our cities, villages, townships, and counties. And those are the things that the viewers will hear is that's how we get funding for police and fire. So it's a very important aspect, and I'm happy to serve on that committee.
And as a former mayor, it is an area that not one elected official at any of those levels you just mentioned is satisfied with their revenue sharing, because for years there has been the push-pull between Lansing and local governments about how much that revenue sharing should be.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a little bit indicative of the entire budget, because when you go through a downturn like we had in Michigan, everybody's got to give a little bit. I think counties, cities, villages, townships all took a really big hit on that. It's going to take a long time to get them back to where they need to be. I'm a firm believer in giving continued incremental improvement to that, so that we can continue to strengthen and edify our villages, townships, cities. But we have to do it in such a way that we don't ever have to go back to the point where we take it back. There's nothing worse than seeing the devastating effects of taking back dollars and reducing police or fire or just FTEs in any government.
When you think about the things you would like to accomplish here, obviously your committee assignments are some of your priorities, but what is it that you, as you step into this, and we're very early on into this term, we're going to talk about the budget, which will be delivered in a couple of weeks in a minute, but it's been kind of a slow roll in some ways. Not that it isn't always in January into early February, but what are the things that you'd like to focus on now that you're here?
You know, probably one of the strongest things I heard from residents was auto insurance. That's no mistake. It's been talked about for years and years, and I think that we're finally going to see something happen with that. The other thing that's very important to all of our residents is clean drinking water. My district includes Rockford, Algoma Township, some of the areas that have been hit by the PFAS thing. When I listened to my residents, they talked about that, and being able to be their voice in Lansing to talk about how we can protect their waters is right at the top. Very committed to that, and I think that the entire community in Lansing knows that this is something that's important for all of us. It's not a partisan issue. Drinking water impacts all of us.
Though your caucus took the unusual measure of disallowing an executive order from Governor Whitmer, with one of the stated parts of that being dealing with PFAS in readjusting or reorganizing the Department of Environmental Quality. She has since issued a second executive order, and we'll see how or if the legislature deals with that. Is that a disconnect, or was that just a matter of keeping those oversight committees in place and something that your caucus felt strongly about?
You know, I wasn't here last year, but those committees were formed based on finding of facts. They had open and many committee hearings about what it was going to take to make this environment better and more accountable. Having residents, businesses, as well as government people on these boards to ensure that we have accountability is really important. And I think it put a stake in the ground so that our caucus could stand up for protecting water rights for everyone, but allowing input not just from the governor, not just from department heads, but from a broad range of people, from stakeholders, real stakeholders like you and me, that actually understand that drinking water is important.
When you go door to door and when you talk to these folks, when you were doing this during the campaign, there are a lot of people who've got some real fears. They've got safety concerns, they've got their health concerns, but they've got property value concerns too. And there's a pretty broad swath out in, particularly you talked about Algoma Township, some of those areas where people are really worried about that. How do you deal with that? I mean, not because you as a state rep can change it, but you certainly have to be kind of their voice for what's going to happen when it comes to whatever remediation or whatever making them whole looks like.
Right. You talked a little bit about things starting off slow. I've taken advantage of that, and so I've had a chance to meet with every mayor, supervisor, and talk about those exact issues. What's going to happen and how do we work together to ensure that we can do the right thing for those residents. It's an unknown factor right now. The whole PFAS thing, if you remember, it's only been on our radar screen for just maybe 18 months or 24 months or less. But we have to continue to pursue this relentlessly to make sure that we ensure that the water is taken care of, that the ground is taken care of. I think that the EPA is taking some steps. It sounds like, I know Senator Peters has worked on this to give us not just guidelines, but to put some science behind this so that we can figure out what the real answers are. PFAS and those chemicals have been around for 20 plus years. And I'll be honest, I didn't hear about them until about last year when the news finally broke about it. We're all learning about it, but we have to take an evidence-based approach in how we resolve these things, not just anecdotes, because we want the right solution for everybody that's going to last into give us some longevity.
You also talked about auto no-fault insurance, and you accurately pointed out that this has been talked about for decades here in Lansing, since 1995 when I started coming here and talking with members. They've been talking about auto no-fault insurance and making some type of change, adjustment, somehow taking that product, making it more affordable. But there's always been a pushback because there are many people who say, but we can't change the kind of coverage that we have, which is the most generous in the nation when it comes to catastrophic care. So while I don't expect you to have all of the answers, what are some of the potential remedies? Because this is an issue that has plagued legislature after legislature after legislature, and it really does seem to be coming to a finer point now. So if you're going to fix it, what does that look like?
Well, I think the approach that the caucus is taking this time around is different. It's a bipartisan effort. It's a chance for people to provide input. No one's putting a line in the sand of this is the time that this has to be done. I think that the caucus says we're going to work very deliberately and intentionally to hear from all stakeholders. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why we haven't seen resolution on in the past, because there are in fact so many stakeholders. I'm a representative. It's in the title, representative. I represent those people, and we need to make sure that we fight for them to make sure that they get the right answer. At the same time, when we make changes to things like auto insurance, we have to worry about the unintended consequences. I suspect there'll be something that'll be approved. It'll probably be something that'll be a little bit of give and take on all the different stakeholders' side. And I think that the process, especially because it's bipartisan, and even the governor has talked about that, it's probably a new day that I'm hopeful that something will happen with it.
I've asked any number of people that I've talked to if divided government doesn't actually give you a little cover. You have the opportunity to say to your constituents, well, the governor's a Democrat, and so we have to give up this. And the Democratic governor said, well, I've got a Republican legislature, so I had to give up part of that. When all of the levers are controlled by one party, you don't have that. So does divided government actually create an opportunity?
Well, I come from the local government side, so it's nonpartisan. So this was a little bit of a change for me. But it's actually not that much different from local government in the sense that we have different people and different factions and different perspectives. We all have to work together. The reality is that we will work together. I think a lot of times people perceive Lansing as being really divided, meaning you don't talk to people, you don't walk across the aisle. The reality is we talk to the Democratic folks all the time. We know that we have to get together, and I think especially if you think about the primary issues that are out there right now, water, auto insurance, those kind of issues, they're nonpartisan. And we all actually want to work towards our stakeholders to make things good.
When we come back, another new lawmaker. That's next. To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. This morning we're introducing you to freshman lawmakers that you may not be familiar with yet. Matt Hall is one such newly elected member who represents part of Calhoun and Kalamazoo counties. Representative, let's talk about how you got here, because the background, where you've worked, you've been involved in state government, now as an elected official. Tell me a little bit about your background, where you've worked, and how you got to this point.
Well, I'm an attorney, and I worked for the Michigan Attorney General's office. I also worked in the Department of State in state government, and I saw our prior representative. I didn't think he represented the district well. He was not for the Second Amendment. He did not support lower taxes and a number of other issues that I heard from the voters that they didn't like. So I decided to challenge him, and I beat him in the primary. This doesn't happen very often, but in this case I did because I listened to the voters and I ran on a clear conservative message. And so I'm grateful for that opportunity to be the representative of the people of the 63rd District.
You mentioned it doesn't happen very often. In fact, it's quite rare for an incumbent to get a serious challenge in a primary, much less be defeated. So you come in now as a freshman, but as a freshman, you've already received some pretty influential assignments when it comes to committees, including oversight. Explain that, what your role will be on oversight.
Yes, and you're right. I worked hard to make sure that we had a Republican majority in the House, and I think my colleagues in the House recognized my leadership ability, and also that while I beat someone that they served with last term, that I am a committed Republican conservative. And so I will now be the chair of the House Oversight Committee, and this is good fit because I've worked in state government in multiple departments, and so I understand how departments work. And what the Oversight Committee does is it investigates the practices of government, and in any case where there's financial abuse or fraud, or where the departments are not following the law or do not understand the law, the House Oversight Committee investigates those things because I believe that we need to have government that works for the people, that spends tax dollars wisely, and follows the law. And so anytime we find an example of abuse or not following the law, we will investigate it and we will bring it to a resolution for the people of Michigan.
I'm interested, as someone who has been here. Now, when I say here, I don't mean as an elected representative, but you certainly have been around state government. You understand how the process kind of works. That gives you a different perspective than many freshman legislators who come from a completely unrelated background. Over these past couple of weeks, we will have done shows with people who come from city government, people who come from an agriculture background, people who have maybe never been involved in government of any sort. What is your view of Lansing and the way it functions or has been functioning, given your experience in watching government? Because we've just come off of an 8-year period where Republicans controlled everything in sight, and now we go into an era of divided government, which creates two very different atmospheres.
That's right. I think the last 8 years under Republican leadership, we saw a return to great economic growth in our state. And that was because we saw the lower taxes, cutting red tape, working with our small business owners, our farmers, and others to make sure that government worked for them. Now we have divided government. And, I look at some of the proposals that Governor Whitmer has put out on the table, and it looks to me the only way to do those things is enormous tax increases. And in my mind, the last time Michigan was a high-tax state, we led the country in job loss. And so my focus is going to be on making sure we fight to keep that economic growth going through low taxes, through cutting red tape, through being a job-friendly state where we attract employers. And so, I'm totally willing to work with the other side on issues where we can agree, but on these issues of principle, on issues of continuing to grow Michigan's economy, I will stand strong for the progress we've made over the last 8 years.
Well, let's put a name to it. It's roads, and a big price tag that could go with that, $3 billion perhaps, on top of about $4 billion that will go directly into transportation funds for roads, of a total of about $5 billion in this fiscal year. But more money has been called for by those parties who say they want to fix the roads, and that was a primary promise in the campaign. So with that being a top priority for the governor, it's not likely that that's something she backs off of. So how do you make that work? How do you make a compromise? Is there some common ground? Because I suspect your constituency would like to have better roads as much as most of the rest of the state.
I talk quite frequently to the people of Calhoun and Kalamazoo counties where I live and represent. And what they say to me is we need better roads. However, they do not want a massive tax increase to pay for those roads. And I think the first place we start is what a Republican Speaker Chatfield proposed, which is to put all of the gas tax money into the roads, all of it. And then we will see a significant increase. There also are a number of funding increases that are in effect right now that we haven't seen the benefits of. So we'll see that play out. And then lastly, I'll say this should be one of the top priorities of government. Roads, public safety, education. We should fully fund those first. We shouldn't fund all kinds of different things and then come to the people of Michigan for a tax increase on the most popular issue. We should fund this first. Should be the highest priority of government, funding our roads and bridges and our infrastructure.
If you were able to do those things, to fund those things, then it is likely, based on the way the budget is today, some other things would have to be cut. Mm-hmm. As you look at the budget overall, and I don't expect you to be a budget expert in your first 45 days, but I know you have been familiar with the budget. Are there places where money can be squeezed out?
Well, I'd say one area that we should consider is this investigation, or this, when we have an attorney general who's initiating lawsuits like we saw on this emergency on our southern border, and we're engaging in political lawsuits, I would suggest that we start looking at that, because this is a crisis, this is an emergency. I signed onto a resolution today asking the Attorney General to withdraw this lawsuit, because we need a wall. This is a crisis, and I stand 100% with President Trump in that we need to defend our country and our southern border. So I'd say we stop some of these political lawsuits to start.
The reality is that there aren't billions of dollars to be saved there, and I appreciate that that's a part of your political statement. But I guess my bigger question is, in a $57 billion budget, when there's roughly $10 billion that is more or less controlled by you and your colleagues, can you move enough money to make that happen without raising taxes when it comes to funding the roads, public safety, and education, the three priorities that you set?
Yes, we can fund those things. And what I'm saying is if they want to discuss raising taxes, then they should talk about those other things and make that case to the people of Michigan and to my constituents that we should raise taxes for those other programs. And what I suspect is we'll see that that's not popular. But let's not play politics with the roads. This should be one of the top three things that we fund in our budget. And the first way to do it is through putting all of the gas tax money into roads.
So we know how you got to this point. We know what your interest is. What do you want to get done in this legislature? Because you have 109 other opinions that you'll be in a big chamber with for the next couple of years. So what is it that you will focus on to try to get done, either something that you're very passionate about getting done or something that you think is very important to get done for your district?
Well, the first thing is I want to do a very great job as chairman of the House Oversight Committee. I want to be a watchdog for the taxpayers of Michigan. I want to be someone who makes sure government works for the people. I'm also on the Regulatory Reform Committee and Tax Policy, and so I want to make sure we remain a low-tax state and we cut red tape, and we're a state that works for the people of Michigan and is a place where people come to bring jobs and do economic growth. So I'll be laser focused on making sure government works for the people, that we're a low-tax state, and that we are friendly regulations for our farmers, our small businesses, our local governments, and other job creators.
And when you talk about job creation and being a job-friendly state, some might say we're one of the friendliest right now with what most economists would consider full employment, but yet we still have a gap in skilled trades. If you're going to continue to attract businesses, I would think that would be a focus as well, to get people prepared for jobs.
It is, and I was in Battle Creek with representatives of the Whitmer administration last week, showcasing Kellogg Community College, where they have a very advanced manufacturing training center for students, and right there they're changing people's lives, and in terms of getting them into the skilled trades, and so we need to do more of it, and I hope that the administration learned from what they're doing there at Kellogg Community College.
I'm fascinated, and I always talk to representatives about this, and we're very early on. So the budget hasn't even dropped, and that's when business will really pick up. And you're one that's been around here, so you're a bit of a creature of state government. But has there been anything surprising or something that you didn't expect that has happened yet, now as being an elected official here in Lansing?
Yeah, I thought that, when everyone talked about bipartisanship, that we wouldn't see this executive order come across that basically tried to eliminate departments of government. I saw that as a lack of bipartisanship from the Democrats, and so I voted to eliminate that executive order. And the reason was I believed that the people of Michigan, the very people I represent, should have had a voice on these panels before environmental regulations went into effect from unaccountable bureaucrats that affected them. And fortunately, because the legislature rejected that order, we now have a new order that keeps two of those panels in place. And so it looks like the bipartisanship is coming back, and we'll be able to move forward. But I was surprised by that misstep from the governor so early on.
And as for that new executive order, the Senate says they will not challenge the governor this time around, so it looks like she'll get her reorganization after all. And we'll be back to the point. The next big event in Lansing will be a budget that will be dropped in the early part of March. And we have more new lawmakers we'll be talking to. Join us every Sunday morning at 10 o'clock on Wood TV 8 or To the Point.